Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM's POTUS.
Welcome to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM for Tuesday, November 19th. I'm Andrew Walworth, and I'm joined by RCP President and co-founder Tom Bevan and Washington Bureau Chief Carl Cannon. So, gentlemen, the fight over the Senate seat in Pennsylvania continues, at least sort of. To review, Republican challenger Dave McCormick leads incumbent Bob Casey by around 17,000 votes. That's less than the 0.5% needed to trigger a recount. And on Monday, the Supreme Court ordered counties to stop counting certain ballots they deemed invalid. Casey still has yet to concede, even though the AP has called it for McCormick. So, Tom, what is going on in Pennsylvania? Is this election denial on the part of Casey and the Democrats, or is it just a matter that every vote counts and this is democracy in action?
Well, certainly a recount is democracy in action. I mean, when you have a race that's within a specified, states have different rules. Sometimes it's half a point, sometimes it's a point, whatever. It triggers an automatic recount, and that happened here, so fine. But what is unacceptable is that the state Supreme Court ruled that ballots that were either didn't have signatures or were postmarked too late were not to be counted. And you had these commissioners in places like Bucks County that just said, no, we're counting them, just defied openly the Supreme Court's ruling and tried to count these ballots. Now, my understanding is it's not a ton of ballots, so I don't think it's going to shift it's not going to shift this race at all, but nevertheless, it's directly flouting the Supreme Court of the United States. And the update is that yesterday, Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro sided with Republicans and the Supreme Court saying, look, these ballots should not count. And so I do think there is a little bit of election denial going on here on the part of Democrats. And Mark Elias, of course, is right in the middle of it, right in the thick of it.
He's the Democratic super lawyer.
He's the big-time Democratic lawyer who basically sues everybody on behalf of Democrats all over the country.
And was so pretty successful in 2016, we should say, right?
He's been very successful, but that doesn't mean that what he's doing is righteous as he claims, and certainly not in this case at all.
So, Carl, the fact that Governor Josh Shapiro sided with the Republicans here that must have upset some Democrats, but it also sort of, is this thing really over? I mean, why is Casey continuing?
I was thinking about this morning. It's a very infinitesimal margin to lose by 10,000, 15,000 votes out of 7 million casts. It must be very difficult to take. And I guess I'm going to continue to say, this is my story and I'm sticking to it. But Senator Casey just wants to make sure he really lost before he concedes. Nobody wants to be in the position that Al Gore was in 2000, where he had to rescind his concession to George W. Bush. We used to have at the San Jose Mercury News, where I worked as a young man, we'd have corrections, and we call them setting the record straight. We, of course, inside the paper, call them set recs. And your nightmare was you had to correct the set rec. In other words, you were right the first time you corrected it, then you have to correct it again. So I would just counsel a little more patience. But I would add this, as small as that margin is, it's hard. A recount, there's very little precedent for a recount turning up, missing 15,000 votes. I mean, if AP calls it, Washington Post has acknowledged it, it seems to me that this has been decided.
Well, Tom, what's the timeline on this? When do you think we'll finally get a resolution?
I have no idea. I mean, hopefully sooner rather than later, get this done.
Tom doesn't like that the Democrats, he doesn't get this. Tom, you've lost the plot. The Democrats have to destroy democracy in order to save it. Come on.
I'm going to use a football analogy so you'll understand this.
All right.
This is not you guys remember the Fail Mary? I'm a Seahawks fan. So the Fail Mary where we threw the Hail Mary pass at the end of the game. This was during the refs when they were on strike. So we had the scab refs in there. And basically, I think it was against the Packers.
Yes, it was against the Packers.
And the defensive back and the Seahawks wide receiver went up and caught the ball basically at the same time. But the defensive back sort of had more possession, okay, it looked like. And they fell to the ground and rolled around, and they basically ended up calling it a touchdown for the Seahawks, and they won. That's a game that is so close, and it's decided. The outcome is decided on the very last play. That's controversial. That is not what this was. This was a football game that was a field goal or a touchdown, even in terms of the lead that McCormick has.
10,000 votes out of 7 million casts is not a touchdown.
Okay,
It's
a field goal.
It's a safety on the last
It is
play
not,
of the game.
This is not some sort of, race that is super. To your point, I don't think there's ever been a recount that has uncovered 15,000 votes, enough to switch the outcome of a race. And so this is largely, this is just a standard exercise that we're going through. But again, Carl, I mean, you have to say, right, these county commissioners that are trying to count these votes and Mark Elias and the lawsuits and all this stuff, we don't need more of that. And it's not even going to, I mean, yes, it's an extra Senate seat for the Republicans in the Senate, but it's not going to alter the balance of power. So it seems to me that this is a bit unnecessary.
I would like to make another point, though. If our listeners are discerning, and most of them are, some people think that Tom sometimes takes the conservative side, but he used an interesting word now. It was a tell. He called the replacement referees in the NFL strike scabs. Now, there's two things I'll say about that. First of all, as best I can tell, the replacement refs were better than the regular refs. The second thing I would say is that Tom just revealed he grew up in a union household, and Tom did.
I did. Actually.
Tom doesn't like strike breakers, and so I just want our audience to be aware that we're not one dimensional on this podcast. We're complicated. We have complicated views.
We've gone off track.
Yeah. All right. Well, guys, I want to talk about swing states. We talked about 7 swing states during the election. Carl was arguing to expand the map, and he may be getting his wish. Newsweek recently had an article listing 5 states which may be trending purple: Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, and Virginia. And 2 of those states, New Jersey and Virginia, Carl, have elections in 2025. So what do you make of that? And are those states that will be in just 4 years looking at saying, gee, they're swing states along with the 7 we were looking at this time?
Well, I think that's possible. And remember, there's a history there. New Hampshire, I mentioned George W. Bush and Al Gore's, near dead heat in 2000. If Al Gore had carried New Hampshire, I mean, he'd have won. And he probably only lost New Hampshire because Ralph Nader was on the ballot. It's only got, 3 or 4 electoral votes, but that in a close election, that can be the difference. New Mexico is another small state, but through most of its history, and I believe it was admitted to the Union in 1912, it has been a bellwether state. I mean, New Mexico has been right almost every time. So that makes some sense. Virginia and New Jersey are important for another reason, the reason you mentioned, Andy. We will get an early look at how voters feel about the Trump administration next year in those 2 states. New Jersey has had and Virginia has had a couple of near misses where Democrats that thought to be safe almost lost to underfunded Republicans in recent years. We also had, when Barack Obama was elected president, the next year, Virginia went gubernatorial for the Republicans in a landslide. And what happens is you have a different electorate. It's going to be lower turnout, and you get the activists and the committed people. But it's an early referendum on the Trump administration. And so while those states 4 years from now may be in the battleground state, the more immediate thing is, if Donald Trump is perceived to be on the right track and the economy is doing well, and some of these appointments, these cabinet appointments that seem so unorthodox, I'll say now, if they work out, maybe we'll get a sign that people like it. If it blows up in his face, you'll have the Republicans will be punished at the polls next year.
Yeah, Tom, are you sufficiently recovered from this election cycle to start looking to 2025?
Sure, why not? Let's go 2028.
Well, we'll get to 2028 in a minute, but let's talk about
2025
first. I mean, in both Virginia and New Jersey, the governor's race it's an open seat this time because of term limits. And
it's always an open seat in Virginia because you can't succeed yourself.
Good point. Yeah,
it's a weird law. I don't like that law.
No, it's terrible. Although Bob Byrd, one of the Byrds, would still be governor if they hadn't got rid of it. I mean,
right. But what will you be looking for in these 2 states just in 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, listen. Part of this is you look at the swing for Republicans and for Donald Trump. Virginia was like 5 points, I think, and New Jersey was like 6. I mean, New Jersey was way closer to going red than Florida or Texas were to going blue, right? Like way closer. Right. Same thing with Illinois was 8 points or something. So there was this big shift, and so we'll see in a year's time whether that is sort of, redounding to the benefit of Republicans, or that's just a Trump thing. I suspect it's probably just a Trump thing, that this was, he had excited different parts of the base and different constituencies that were traditionally Democratic, came out and voted for him, all across the country, including a lot of these blue states, which is why we saw that swing. So I wouldn't, if I were Republicans, I would not be getting getting all cocky about their prospects for Virginia and New Jersey governorships next year. Those are still states that lean blue, and will be an uphill battle for Republicans in, I think, both of those races.
All right. Well, we're going to keep an eye on them both. Something to look forward to in the year ahead. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about who might lead the Democrats out of the wilderness. We've got a poll on that, believe it or not. Don't go away. We'll be back after this.
This is Real Clear Politics on POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124. Not bound by any left-right constructs.
Real Clear Politics. Open to a wide political spectrum.
This is POTUS on Sirius XM Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I've got with me Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. So, guys, let's talk about the Democrats. The question around D.C. is who will lead them out of the wilderness? And we have a poll already. It's from Echelon Insights. They say this: 41% of Democrats say they want Kamala Harris to run at the top of the ticket. 2028. California Governor Gavin Newsom trails. He gets 8%. Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, 7%. Pete Buttigieg, the mayor, and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, former vice presidential candidate, each secure 6%. So, Carl, that's what we know right now. It's a little early, but any of these names spark you as someone who might lead? And I think I know what you're going to say.
Well, it's quite early. 41% for Kamala Harris. That's an interesting number. That's probably about how much of the vote she'd get if she ran again. 40% is the Democrats' number. If they nominate George McGovern, they get 40%. And that's a poll about name ID. But it's hard to know 4 years from now who are going to be the candidates. If right now, at this moment, the Democratic Party has two very charismatic governors, Gavin Newsom, who's in that poll, and Gretchen Whitmer, whose name you didn't mention. But you're going to have a primary next time. You didn't have that before. And it's not good. It's going to be an open seat. And it's not only going to be an open seat, it's going to be wide open. And you'll hear people say this is for the soul of the Democratic Party. And that's not my understanding of the word soul, although we use that phrase in politics. But you will get an idea of where the base wants to go and whether the base wants to nominate someone that passes all the litmus tests, or whether the base wants to nominate someone who can beat J.D. Vance or whoever the Republican nominee is.
Tom, what do you make of those names, and anyone you add or subtract to it?
Well, I did not see J.B. Pritzker on there, and he obviously thinks of himself as presidential material, although I'm not sure many other people do.
Governor of Illinois. Go ahead.
Yeah, my governor. And Gretchen Whitmer is another one that Carl mentioned, who I think has got to be in the consideration set for next time around. Look, 41% for Harris. I mean, this is a recency thing. This is a sympathy thing. This is not a real number. She would not get 41% if she had to run against all of those people. She's done this before. She did enter a primary. She was the first one out. She was not a good candidate. We saw her on the trail this time around. She was not a good candidate. So I fully expect that she may think of herself as being sort of having pole position for 2028. But I would be shocked. And Carl, I mean, look, it's a 4-year bet. Or I guess 3 at this point, but I'll bet you a bottle of wine right now that Kamala Harris is not the nominee. You can have the field.
Oh, no, you don't have to bet me. I don't think she's going to run.
Yeah, she's probably not going to.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe she will because she's young enough, but I just don't think she
I don't think
would make it through a primary at all. Yeah. Okay, so you didn't take my sucker bet?
Well, remember, she ran 5 years ago and she didn't make it to the starting gate.
I know.
Yeah, she hasn't proven herself a strong national candidate.
Yeah, and it's hard to think if she's out of office for 4 years. I mean, if she doesn't have a platform to run from, that one of these governors will be in the news every day.
The other thing, if I could
Gavin Newsom's the guy.
Not necessarily. 4 years to me
Wow.
is
Okay. A little backpedaling from Carl
no,
Cannon.
no. I mean, I vote for him, Andy. That's different. But you're asking me to predict the future. I'm sorry, but that's just an eternity in politics. Look, he's a very charismatic figure. He represents a state that is far to the left of the electorate in any of these swing states, no matter how much we expand the map. So it's not a shoe-in. I think Gretchen Whitmer, if I could get 10-1 odds, I mean, I think she's a very attractive candidate and says the right thing. She's from the Midwest. She's from a swing state. I think she's there. You look around the cabinet, Pete Buttigieg ran last time. He's got some name ID. He did not distinguish himself as Secretary of Transportation, in my view. Gina Raimondo was kind of the star of that cabinet, in my view. I don't know if she wants to run. I think she'd be a good candidate in the early states, Iowa, New Hampshire. But look, Howard Dean was thought to be a shoo-in a month before the first primary. We're talking 3.5 years before the first primary. So it's unknowable.
Right.
But the Democratic Party is going to have to figure out, yes, we have politics of personality. It's very big. But they also have to figure out where they want to be on the spectrum on some of these difficult social issues and on foreign policy.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is that, look, if the Democrats conclude, I think as they should, that they have lost touch with working class, folks in the country, in the middle of the country, but also within, the African American community or the Hispanic community, and they need to sort of rebuild that relationship. Who out there is going to do it? I mean, who's the best conduit? Who is the best carrier of that message? I don't know that Gavin Newsom, as slick as he is that guy. I don't know that anyone on that list, maybe Gretchen Whitmer. Josh Shapiro doesn't come off as sort of a working class guy, although he is governor of one of the biggest states. But, Amy Klobuchar was someone last time who made it down to the sort of the final three. They've got to nominate someone who can repair that bond with the working class. And you would think that they would have to be, like a John Fetterman or someone. You would think that they would have to be able to speak to directly working class folks in a very authentic way. But they don't have to necessarily. I mean, look at Donald Trump. He doesn't look like a working class guy, but he speaks very authentically to working class people. So I just don't. I look at Gavin Newsom and I think, I don't know that, hard hats in Ohio or Michigan are looking at him and thinking like, that's our guy.
A point of personal privilege, Andy.
I goaded him into it. I criticized his.
If people are listening to this for the first time, and I say that often because Joe DiMaggio used to say he'd hustle late in the game, meaningless game in September. The Yankees were 10 games in front of first place. He had a routine ground ball to the shortstop, and he'd run like hell down the first baseline. And he would say, well, maybe there's somebody in the stands who's never seen me play before. So I keep that we have a following. But also, if you're new to the show, Andy and Tom are friends of mine. They tease me about Gavin Newsom, both because I'm from California and because I speak highly of Newsom. But the real story here, just so you know, is Gavin Newsom's father was a good friend of mine. And he was a judge in San Francisco. And I take friendship as least as seriously as I take politics. So I'm not really trying to shill for Newsom. But I don't pretend to be objective about it either.
Well, okay. I'm glad we cleared that up. Hey, let's talk about today is the 161st anniversary of the Gettysburg Address. Carl, you brought that to my attention this morning when I read about it in your morning note, which folks can get on RCP. You can read it on RCP every day. You can also get it in your inbox as a free newsletter, which I highly recommend. So, Carl, what are your thoughts of the continued relevance of this speech by Abraham Lincoln? It's the most famous speech in American history, just about, right?
Well, you think about it. The first thing that comes to mind is how short it was. There are different transcriptions of it, but none of them have it more than 272 words. And as I wrote in my newsletter, we live in an era of Fidel Castro length speeches by presidents. Donald Trump's normal address lasts 75 minutes. This speech lasted 5, and with it, he basically started the second. He gave the intellectual underpinnings of the Second American Revolution, which was in the minds of Frederick Douglass and modern historian Gary Wills, completed the job started by the founding fathers with this, with the founding of the country, but a founding that included slavery. And with these beautiful crafted words. Every schoolboy or schoolgirl knows it begins, 7 years ago. Our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And he goes on, we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether a nation conceived on those principles can long endure. It's eloquent, it's beautiful. He wasn't even the featured speaker of the day, as you guys know. He was he was asked by a local attorney in Gettysburg to make a few introductory remarks. And in his speech link, it says, people little remember what we say here, but we've never forgotten what he said here, because it gave meaning to the American experiment. This country might not have survived without that speech.
Yeah. And as you say, he was the second speaker, I think, of the day. And the first one was this guy who gave a 2-hour speech, which was, so people did give long speeches before. And, one of the remarkable things about it is the brevity of it. Tom, but, does it inform our rhetoric today at all? I mean, we do have short speeches. They're called Twitter. But they don't sort of rise to this level, do they?
No, they don't. I think, look, the way of the old way of writing and speaking has long left us, and we do it differently now. And I think for a lot of people, especially those of us who enjoy history, probably think it's for the worse, not the better. But I was going to comment on what Carl just said. I mean, the line, "The world will little note or long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here." And it turns out the world has long remembered what was said there, and by this president. One of the greatest speeches ever, and we're still talking about it. 161, Carl?
Well, think about it.
1863.
Think about this, Andy. Abraham Lincoln spoke with more graciousness towards men who had taken up arms against their country than, the Democrats did about Donald Trump, or Donald Trump does about the Democrats today. I mean, this coarseness and this name calling, this what Matt Taibbi called Hate Incorporated, the title of his book, that doesn't get you very far. And I think that my guess is we'll turn back to Lincoln. We've done it again and again in our nation's history. It may be time to do it once more.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to leave it there, guys. It's been fun. We've been looking back. We've been looking forward. It's great to do this with you guys. You're listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm here with Tom Bevan and Carl Cannon. When we come back, Tom's going to talk to Phil Wegmann, our White House correspondent, about some cabinet picks we've learned of today. So don't go away. We'll be back after this.
This is Real Clear Politics on POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics
on POTUS, Sirius XM Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Tom Bevan, co-founder and president of RCP, joined now by Phil Wegmann. He's our White House reporter. Mr. Wegmann, how you doing?
I'm doing well.
So let's talk about a couple of updates. Sean Duffy for transportation. This is one of those picks, Phil, that I think of all the other ones, I could say, I think Sean Duffy is he's a fine congressman. I have no problem with him. I think he's a nice guy. I've actually met him a couple of times, but I'm not sure how much experience he has in the transportation department. I know he served in the House, and I think he worked on the transportation committee for a little bit, but so maybe he's got a little bit more experience than Pete Buttigieg, but this is sort of Buttigieg light to me. He doesn't seem to have a really deep understanding or knowledge of our transportation system. That doesn't mean he won't do a good job. Maybe he will, but I was looking for someone with everybody else has some relevant experience for the position that they've been picked for. What do you make of this pick?
The former congressman certainly isn't a lightweight, as you mentioned. He served on the Transportation Committee in the House. He was also a prosecutor. This is someone who has been in Washington, D.C. circles for some time. But no, he doesn't have the experience that you would expect in terms of on-the-job work. He's never worked at a port or a massive trucking company. But again, it is Donald Trump's transition. And we're all just living in it again and again. I see all of these stories that sort of insinuate that a certain advisor is pushing one person or the other, and they may very well be. But Donald Trump is returning to Washington, D.C., not as a political novice. Instead, he wants his people in these key positions. And it is sort of an obvious point at this moment, but it's worth repeating. Loyalty is the most important thing to this guy because he was continuously frustrated when he would give orders in his first administration and they weren't carried out. So he wants to staff his administration with loyalists, and he thinks that they can learn on the job if they don't have relevant experience.
And the other piece of news that we were looking at earlier, Phil, was Howard Lutnick apparently is sort of in the pole position for Treasury. There was a little bit of a dispute. Tell us what happened there with Elon, and this was like one of the flashpoints of the bromance that's been happening between these two.
So we saw Elon Musk come out in support of Howard Lutnick. The problem here is that Linda McMahon is hardest hit because she is the other co-chair of the Trump transition team, and she was reportedly very interested in the commerce position as well. I'm waiting to see if there's confirmation on Truth Social. That's the new sort of regimen here. You see a leaked report, you try to get it confirmed, but the biggest confirmation is if the former president actually puts out a statement on his competing social media platform there. The thing that's interesting about Lutnick, though, is that he seemed to get over his skis a little bit during the campaign. He told reporters that Project 2025 was radioactive, and then members of Project 2025 ended up in the transition. He said that RFK Jr. was not going to lead HHS, and then that's exactly what happened. This is a lesson that some former cabinet members had to learn the hard way of getting out in front of Donald Trump. So if in fact he does become Commerce Secretary, he's going to have to be a bit more guarded. One thing that the Trump team really likes about him is he's a good salesman for tariffs. He was able to take the case to CNBC and be successful. So we'll see if these rumors are true and if these reports are confirmed. But as of now, it sounds like Donald Trump got his man over at Commerce.
Okay. Let's talk about Doge for a second, because we haven't spent a lot of time talking about that because it's a new agency and we don't know anything about what it's going to look like or what it's going to do. I mean, well, I guess we know what it's going to try and do, which is cut a bunch of fraud and waste and from the government. Co-headed by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. We had a piece on the site this morning talking about Vivek, his jackhammer and chainsaw. Those were the words that were used. Plan, jackhammer and chainsaw plan to get federal workers back in the office. Apparently, after COVID, a lot of workers, and this happened at private companies too, but I think most private companies have returned to at least 2, 3, 4 days a week in the office. Some have gone all the way back to 5 days. But apparently there's an awful lot of federal workers that are working in the office 1 day or less. And so Vivek is going to try and get those folks back in the office. How's he going to do that? What and where did this plan come from? Why did this become a focal point of his?
Well, for instance, the Department of Education, according to some estimates, just 16% of their office space is being utilized on a regular basis. That's the type of thing that is going to make a lot of Americans' blood boil. I'm very curious about Doge because is this a government agency that actually gets created through Congress, or instead is this a glorified blue ribbon commission? Either way, there's value here because what Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are going to be doing is exerting pressure on the outside. They're going to be going to Rand Paul and all of these other fiscal hawks in Congress and saying, show me the goods, show me all of these egregious examples of government waste, fraud, and abuse, and we're going to highlight them. In terms of actually shaping and changing the government workforce, I would expect that would be something that the Office of Management and Budget would do. Whereas, Elon and Ramaswamy can shed light on some of the problems. It's going to be up to the OMB director to maybe through using Schedule F, which is a classification for federal employees that allows them to be hired and fired more quickly, reshapes the government agencies. The thing is, Trump promised that things are going to change. Now he's running up into an almost unmovable object, which is the federal government, and he's going to need all hands on deck. Whether it's just a spotlighting some of the problems or not, but we'll see.
We're speaking with Phil Wegmann, White House reporter for Real Clear Politics. Phil, a couple minutes left. And the other story that we had on Real Clear Politics was the fact, and this is no surprise, that, for some of these folks who've been nominated, Gates at Justice is one example, Hegseth at the Pentagon is another, that they kind of have grudges, is the term that Reuters used, against these agencies, and now they're going to be leading them. I think that might be, well, maybe in Gates's case that's accurate. I'm not sure that Hegseth has a grudge against the military. Maybe he does, just about the DEI stuff. But there's definitely a sense that this is not going to be go along, get along. This is going to be very adversarial, and it is. It's going to be the Avengers coming in and doing battle with the federal government. You can't think of a more entrenched bureaucracy than some of these folks who've been in Washington for years and years and years, doing stuff the same way, in a very comfortable position, making good money, and exerting a lot of power and influence over, everyday taxpayers' lives. So what is that going to look like? And what are the expectations? I mean, how reasonable is it to assume that they will be able to, as you said, make any significant changes? Or are they just going to run into a brick wall?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I'm curious if that Reuters headline would apply also to the American electorate, because it seems they would have a grudge against the status quo as well. Look, this election didn't just come down to the economy or immigration. It was a number of different things. And certainly Trump was running as a, anti-establishment figure. The question now is, can he remake that establishment in either his image or what was promised on the campaign trail? With Hegseth, for instance, it's a really good example of someone who maybe he doesn't have the most austere resume. The guy's a war hero, and he spent 20 years in the military. He wasn't a general, but he knows how it works. And so one of the frustrations with the Pentagon is that it has gone woke, and that some of these 3- and 4-star generals got too comfortable. Hegseth is advertising that he's going to be the guy who's going to come in there and return the, Pentagon to its actual mission. The question is, can Trump do this, or can some of this entrenched bureaucracy just wait him out? And they know how to play this game. If he's going to make significant changes that are going to last, yes, he can hire 10,000 new political employees, but there's an army much larger by orders of magnitude who are just permanent employees. So will he actually be able to go in there and root this out and change things? He feels he has a mandate, and this is something that he can do without Congress. We'll see, but it's going to be messy. It's going to be chaotic. And frankly, the Republican base is fine with that. They don't mind a little bit of chaos.
And I'm sure the media is going to cover it completely fairly.
We'll be here for all of it.
At least you will, and we will at Real Clear Politics. I'm not sure about everybody else. All right, we're going to leave it there. Phil Wegmann, White House reporter for Real Clear Politics. Phil, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
All right, going to take a quick break, and we will be right back with more after this.
Online at RealClearPolitics.com.
On air on SiriusXM Channel 124.
Real Clear Politics is on POTUS. Welcome back to Real Clear Politics with Andrew Walworth. You're listening to SiriusXM's POTUS, Channel 124.
Welcome back to Real Clear Politics on SiriusXM. And today, Tuesday, U.S. officials confirmed that Ukraine fired 6 U.S.-supplied long-range missiles deep into Russian territory. The Russians reported that 5 were destroyed mid-flight and the 6th was damaged. No injuries reported. Also today, Russia announced a change in its nuclear doctrine, saying that an attack from a non-nuclear state like Ukraine that was supported by a nuclear power like the U.S. would be considered a joint attack, opening the door, I suppose, to the possible use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. So here to help us sort out what all this means is Jakub Grygiel. He is at Catholic University. He's been here before. Jakub, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back.
So what do you make of this latest development? First of all, do you think the reports of the first strike are true? And if so, is it possible that all 6 missiles were defeated by Russian air defense systems?
Well, I think the reports that Ukrainians attacked the ammunition depot about 100 miles inside of Russia are true. The reports that 5 out of 6 missiles have been shot down come from Russia, which tells me, well, A, that maybe that's not true. And then B, that they're trying to minimize actually the public effect of it. And they're saying essentially that these attacks don't hurt them. So it's a way, I think, for the Russians to minimize these attacks, and therefore also to minimize the response, which they have said will be massive and serious.
When do you think we'll know what the real effects were of the attack? I mean, are they going to, is it in Ukraine's interest, in the U.S. interest, to let us know what the damage is? Because as far as I know, Biden has not yet officially announced that he's changed this decision about letting the Ukrainians strike into Russian territory with these U.S. missiles.
Right. I think that's correct. And I think that's a good posture. I think the National Security Advisor, Sullivan, mentioned, I think yesterday or 2 days ago in an interview, that he's not confirming or confirming the change in the lifting of the restrictions. So they don't want to talk about it publicly, which I think is good, because a lot of these actions should be done in silence. And so I think we will never know exactly when this attack will or the next attack will happen and what exactly is the damage. I think on the Russian side, again, I think that there's an interest in showing that these attacks are militarily pointless, that there's no casualty, that they are ineffective, again, to show that they have an upper hand militarily, and no matter what the West throws at them, including lifting restrictions on short and medium range missiles, no matter what the West throws at them, they are still there and they'll continue to attack. A lot of the Russian policy is very, strong on rhetoric. They've been saying that they will escalate in response to tons of other actions over the past 2 years that we and other Western allies have done, or the Ukrainians have done. Right? They were threatening massive retaliation if we, the West, would give tanks or armor to Ukrainians. They certainly threatened massive retaliation in case we gave them fighter jets, we gave them F-16s and tons of other planes. They threatened massive retaliation if the Ukrainians would strike inside Russia with their own means, which they have done, not to mention they have actually entered Russia in the Kursk Oblast, in the Kursk region, and they're still holding Russian territory. So a lot of this is rhetorical, and it tells me again that the Russians are not eager, I think, to escalate further. They're escalating in other ways, perhaps by helping the Houthis, by perhaps the recent news is that the cable has been cut in the Baltic Sea, whether they've done it or the Chinese have done it, or a dolphin bit it. I don't know, but they are not. I think the Russians are not eager to escalate this war with the West.
So what do you make then of this announcement of a change in their nuclear doctrine? Because clearly it's tied directly to this, was announced today as well. This is the fear, of course, is that while at this point, you're right, they have not responded, certainly not with the nuclear option level. But, escalation, anyone who's studied escalation theory knows that the problem is it's a theory, and that at some point, humans get involved and mistakes are made, and the danger is there. And so, first of all, how important is nuclear doctrine in this? I mean, these sorts of statements, do they really matter when they change something like this?
The actual wording of the nuclear doctrine, I think, matters less, because it's done, again, for public consumption. And it's done to show that they're serious. It's a signaling effect. Ultimately, it's a decision of whoever is the commander, and in the case it's Putin, of when and how to use nuclear weapons. The recent change that happened in the last couple of days, it's fairly minimal. And it essentially says that, or repeats something that they've said before, is that the Russians reserve the right to use nuclear weapons when there is a critical threat to their sovereignty or territorial integrity. That was in versions of it that were there before. And they added essentially a bunch of verbiage saying that that means if there is a mass attack on Russian territory using conventional weapons. So I think, they're drawing some sort of line saying if there is a mass attack using drones, ballistic missiles, jet fighters, I think there are some other cruise missiles, they may consider responding in a nuclear fashion. So it's slightly changing the verbiage. Now, I don't think the risk of a nuclear response of Russia is not zero. Obviously, they have nuclear weapons. And in many ways, they think of nuclear weapons in a very different way than we do. Namely, they actually think that they always thought that nuclear weapons can be used in war. Mm-hmm. We always thought nuclear weapons should not be used, and they should be used essentially to deter the use of nuclear weapons. Right? Very theoretical game theory logic. The Russians thought that this is actually a tool of war that can be used on a battlefield. That's why they have hundreds, if not thousands, of tactical nuclear weapons. So small yield nuclear weapons that, in theory, ought to be used on the battlefield. So they have a very different understanding of it. Will they use them against Ukraine? Well, I don't know. But every single moment that we took a decision that in some way escalated perhaps the conflict by helping Ukraine, they have threatened a lot, but they have not done much.
Right. Yeah. I guess... like I say, I mean, the net effect of this change, though, it does, at least rhetorically, lower the barrier to the use of nuclear weapons in this conflict. It may make, you're right. It may mean nothing, but at the same time, we can look at it and it does move the meter a little bit in that direction. But I want to ask you about something else, and you're listening to Real Clear Politics. Just so you know, I'm Andrew Walworth. I'm talking to Jakub Grygiel of Catholic University. What do you make of the overall decision that Biden has made to allow these weapons to be used in this way? Because some people think, well, this is strengthening Ukraine in advance of Donald Trump taking over. Donald Trump has obviously said that he wants to end the war, and this will put Ukraine in a stronger position. Other people think that this sort of undercuts Trump's position going forward, and that it's a signal that Biden is sort of all in up until January 20th and trying to really support Ukraine to the point where Ukraine could somehow continue the war, I guess, on its own, or would be more likely to continue fighting and less likely to accept some sort of armistice. Which direction do you think we're going in here?
It's a good question. I mean, it's certainly true that the Biden administration has refused to lift these restrictions until the elections. And so there is at least a correlation between Trump being reelected to the White House and this decision. Now, whether there's actually causation, I don't know. The problem, I think, with the decision that they took is, in my view, that it's a little bit late. That the Ukrainians have been asking this for months, if not years, and others have been actually pushing this for months and almost 2 years at this point. It's sort of like, as a friend of mine put it, it's sort of like giving a tractor to somebody who lost a farm. So we gave them we were lifting some of these restrictions, and by the way, it's not clear if they lifted all the restrictions. Right. My sense is that there continue to be very clear restrictions of what they can strike. So again, they struck an ammunition depot in a region that is close to the Kursk region, so probably also close where the North Korean troops may be. So they probably can strike airports. They probably can strike logistical nodes and so on and so forth. That's my guess. I have no information. So not all restrictions seem to be lifted, but it's late. And at this point, the problem is that the Ukrainians themselves are very, very tired. The opinion polls in Ukraine have seen a dramatic increase of Ukrainians themselves saying that they're tired of the war and they're willing to take some territorial to accept some territorial concessions in order to end this war. Their manpower problem is serious. They simply just don't have enough men to put on the front line. A lot of Ukrainians have left Ukraine, probably with intent not returning, which has an enormous hit on their economic ability to survive in the future. So my point is, the hour is late at this point, and lifting restrictions may have some impact, I'm just not sure at this point what they will be.
Wow. Well, this has been great. You've been listening to Real Clear Politics on Sirius XM. I'm Andrew Walworth. My guest has been Jakub Grygiel from Catholic University. We check in with him from time to time on Ukraine. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with more Real Clear Politics. Have a great evening.
The
Politics
of
the
United States.
This is POTUS on Sirius XM Channel 124.